like that, but I'm absolutely fascinated with the psychology behind invention and why people are driven to, well, to create it all. I mean, there's all sorts of evolutionary bases and all these.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your boy Juju, and welcome back to the 1% of Juju podcast, where we teach you the practical steps to live your life like the 1%. As you guys can see, if you guys are watching on YouTube, I am back on the road. I am really excited about the conversation today, and we have Matt Powell here with us today. We'll dive right into things, and I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself. So, Matt, give us a quick rundown of who you are, what brings us here today, what brings us to this conversation.
Sure, sounds good. I guess in a nutshell, you could say I'm a patent guy. So I deal with inventions and patents and new ideas, and it's a fascinating space. So my official title is a patent agent.
Yep.
And in Canada, that means that you're entitled to represent inventors before the patent office. And what does that mean? An inventor could be someone who created something in their kitchen, at their workshop, but also an inventor is a computer scientist in a software development company, or is an engineer on the line who's figured out some kind of new way to run an assembly line and things like that. So inventors are all around us, and often a business wants to take advantage of inventions so that they can build a new product line or something that's interesting to customers. And so what they want is exclusivity on the invention.
Right.
So they come to me to say, okay, Matt, here's our concept. Here's what we're looking to do with it. How do we stop others from copying what we've created? Because we want to be the only ones that offer it. And so I'm a patent agent, so I deal with the patent side of exclusivity and intellectual property. And there are other kinds of intellectual property. We can get right into those if you want at some point. But that's, in a nutshell, what I am. I'm an engineer. I work in a law firm, and I work with the law firm's clients as well as other clients of my own directly.
Makes sense. No, exciting. And just this introduction brought so many questions to me. And I know I lured you in with the idea of the patent agent, but I'm really excited to speak a little bit about the minds of an inventor and what goes throughout the process of, well, having an idea in your kitchen, like you just mentioned, and taking it all the way down to, well, now it's a business. Now it's something that, I can make money and make a livelihood around. And I would maybe start with this question, and I don't know your exact thoughts on it, because the reason I was so passionate about this conversation specifically is I heard something on another podcast recently where people in this millennial or Gen Z generation, they're kind of looking at the Gen X generation and saying, well, you guys at least had a framework of how to do things, right? Like, you guys could just go to school, find a job, and you'll be successful. And now that's changing a little bit, where you're seeing all types of people generating, whether it's wealth or making a life for themselves in different ways, right? Like, what are your thoughts when it comes to that specifically, how you're changing maybe the job market or the market as a whole towards more entrepreneurship and business, and not so much around, being employed and making a life for yourself that way? Yeah,
it's quite interesting. I am one of those who have benefited from probably towards the tail end of sort of the era, and maybe it'll be back in some form or another. But you go to school, and I went to university. I got an electrical engineering degree. And then I guess my bent was always in sort of the entrepreneur side. I did apply for jobs at places like Nortel, big companies with cubicles and a set agenda for here's where we plug you in, Matt. But I didn't get that job. I applied for the jobs. I didn't get that job. I interviewed at the job. I didn't know enough. I wasn't sort of what they were looking for. But I found myself in a smaller company that was really entrepreneurial as a software developer. So I left university and I became a software developer for a few years. And that really gave me a taste for what it means to find your own way rather than just plug into someone else's way that was defined 50, 60 years ago and is sort of just tuning itself to a new market. So I really enjoy working with folks that are finding their own way, and they come to me and they say, listen, it's just me. I've got this concept at my kitchen table. I was working on such and such, and it just occurred to me.
Yeah.
And what I've become interested in. You're not going to call me an expert in it or anything like that, but I'm absolutely fascinated with the psychology behind invention and why people are driven to create it all. I mean, there's all sorts of evolutionary bases and all these sort of things, and lots have been written.
Yeah.
But when they come to me, they're driven by an urge to mark their place in the future. It's something like that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So, and they may not say it that way.
Yep,
It sounds profound to say it that way.
Yeah,
they may
yeah.
not say it that way. But roughly speaking, when you create something that is going to, you hope, change your life in even a marginal way, you're actually sort of in a way creating the future and putting yourself in the middle of the future.
Yep.
And so they come to me with these ideas and say, what can I do about them? And part of that is saying, well, in order to not get pushed asunder by the tidal wave of all the big companies that are out there that are looking to suck up ideas into them and make their customers happy with your ideas, you have to have some way to stop them from doing that.
100%.
And that's where they come to, because they intuit that they need that. They intuit, first of all, they don't want to be seen as foolish for putting an idea out there, like a new product, that just gets swept up into Facebook or the big companies. They want to resist that a bit because they want to build their own thing in their own spot in the future. And they don't want to be ignored. They don't want Facebook to go and throw up the same kind of invention or concept or whatever it is and not be taken. So they intuit that they need to come to someone to help them stop others from copying them in an illegal way.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of people, and I deal with software people who, some filmmakers who've come up with interesting concepts for allowing people to tell stories better with their film, and they don't want to get swept up into Apple's what's the name of their software? But anyway, these kinds of things. So, yeah.
No, that's really interesting. That brings so many questions. I really think that this conversation is going to be interesting because it's going to be all over the place.
Sure.
But what would you see, like how early on do people come to you? Because another thing that maybe that brought to me is a lot of people want to know if there's any interest for their idea out there, right? Like, because something I sometimes think about, a lot of things that may be interesting to me might not be interesting to the public as a whole. Like before they go and come to you and like, well, I don't want to get this idea stolen. They might want to know if, like, is this an idea that's even worth getting stolen? So how early on do people come to you? Or,
usually, an idea will start as an inkling, and you won't know. Like if someone comes to me and they're sort of looking to bounce off ideas, we call them in law firms, we call them cold calls. Someone will just phone and say, "Hey, can I tell you about my idea?" And it's really raw, but can we talk? And then we can, in the talking, we start to put some structure around what they're doing, and I start to talk about some of the intellectual property things, but also the business realities, like, are you going to spend $25,000 on a patent when your market for the next 5 years is really only be about $10,000? Like, is that worth it for you?
Yeah.
So we talk about those things, and that allows them to learn. I've veered away from the core of your question.
No, that's okay.
You're going to have to re-articulate it for me. But what I think is useful to people, they don't know necessarily how quickly to come to me and what to come to me with. And I find that very often people come with just an explanation, a verbal explanation over the phone. Now, we have to be a little bit careful because as a law firm, we have other clients.
Right.
An individual may be expressing something to me that another client is working on. So we have to be very careful, just sort of, this is an administrative issue, but it's an important one, where if someone wants to express their idea to me, we have to run just a conflict check about the general concept. I don't receive any confidential information until such time as we're totally clear to hear it. Because you can imagine an individual sort of saying, I just invented and names the next feature for Facebook, and let's say Facebook's a client.
Yeah.
You're just like, oh boy. You're stuck, right? And the individual will be devastated, and Facebook will be like, you just tied us up in knots with kind of receiving confidential information that you shouldn't have.
Makes sense.
That's sort of just, if someone's going to call me and wants to talk about an idea, they should know that there's a bit of administration we have to make sure of for their sake and for current clients' sake, from a conflict standpoint. But barring that, an individual can say, listen, hey, Matt, I was just thinking, like I was sitting there and I was cutting tomatoes with a knife.
Right.
And I was like, all the juice was getting everywhere, and it just it hit me, what if we could do X? And I don't know whether it's some kind of new mat that sucks up juices or whether it's some kind of new knife that can, I'm being a bit silly because there's lots of stuff like that, but you never know, right? You never know where this stuff's going to come from. And they say, so it occurred to me that maybe we could do X, Y, Z. And I said, okay, have you ever thought, is there anything else in the space that you noticed is like that or that addresses the problem? We start to have this kind of conversation about who else is out there.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to figure out how much the inventor, well, we'll call them the prospective inventor because we don't know if they've invented yet, but we're going to find out how much they know and how much they're considering others and current activity in what they're doing.
Yep.
So if they're like, yeah, I know that XYZ company makes these knives and I've been using them for years and they're no good. And I know I saw something on, as seen on TV, and there was some guy that was talking about a thing, and I said, well, let's chase that down because it's important that any invention be universally novel,
right,
and universally not obvious in order to get a patent.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, you can't get a patent. That's two of the sort of main pillars of criteria. You can't get a patent on something that already exists.
Got it.
Okay, or something that is so similar to something that already exists that it would be obvious.
Makes sense,
right? So,
because that was going to be one of my next questions: is like, to what extent, like, when we talk about intellectual property, maybe let's give people like a little bit of an idea what intellectual property actually is. Because my question was going to be, well, right now we live in a world, and obviously I'm recording a podcast here, but content creation is a big thing, right?
Yeah.
Like how you see a lot of people kind of replicating maybe the same content.
Yep.
Is that something you can get intellectual property over? Or let's start with what intellectual property actually is, and then veer towards like, to what extreme can it get for you to actually get IP over something?
Great. Okay, sure. So intellectual property roughly is sort of a matrix of legal statutes and systems that allow an individual or a company who has created something to stop others from copying it.
Right.
So, and the sort of, I don't know, you could get into the philosophy of this, the legal, or even just the sort of straight philosophy of it. But roughly speaking, to be able to stop others from copying things means that the only way customers can get that thing is from you or with your permission. And when you want to do that, that exclusivity allows you to take their dollars instead of them being distributed across 100 different competitors offering the same thing, pushing prices down. It allows you to be the only one getting those dollars in your door, which allows you to build a company, which allows you to get employees, which allows you to get profits. So otherwise, everything just gets sort of distributed across the system. So intellectual property, there are a few main types, and we talked a bit about patents.
Yep.
And a patent is the right to stop others from copying an invention. Now, an invention is what you might, generally speaking, what you might think of when you think of sort of the inventor in the workshop or a kitchen or wherever inventing stuff. It is an invention can be a machine. It can be a process. It can be a method of manufacturing. We call them compositions of matter, just a thing that you can drop on your toe or that has some kind of effect in the world, like a chemical process that changes the character or condition of something, right?
Makes sense.
So hold that in your mind and then compare that, say, to what copyright is for. Now, copyright is for protecting the expression of an idea. Now, and you'll find as we're thinking through this that there does seem to bleed in and there does seem to be sort of overlap between these sort of quote-unquote categories of intellectual property.
Yep.
But patents is one thing, and it really comes down to machines and processes and things that can, like I say, you can drop it on your toe or you can see it working in the real world. Even if you have a microscope, you can see it working. An idea is something that appeals to the mind, right? And so an expression of an idea is something like a book or a podcast recorded, or a song or a poem that was put in a fixed form. And you want to be able to have the right to stop others from copying that And you may only want to stop others from copying that just so they give you attribution when they do. They say, hey, Julian's the one that wrote this poem, or something like that. Or you may want to stop them from just taking it altogether and putting it in an anthology of poems, or putting it on their album, or throwing it up on Spotify and saying it's theirs as a song, let's say, something like that. And so copyright is there to stop that kind of thing. And you can imagine, like, in your mind, a song is quite a different thing from a machine, right? And so copyright tends to be used with respect to things that have to do with artistic creations.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So another kind of intellectual property we talk about a lot in this office is trademarks. And a trademark is like a word or a phrase or a slogan or even a design that that allows you to represent yourself as the exclusive provider of goods and services. And you can imagine McDonald's doesn't want Matt Powell coming along and creating a restaurant called McDonald's where I live in Georgetown, because if I used a big golden arches and everything and said, everybody come by here, I'm trading off their name. And what if I do a crummy job making hamburgers? It hurts McDonald's brand. So McDonald's wants to be able to stop others from copying their branding. So trademarks and stuff is really about branding. And the sort of public policy reason for having trademarks at all is so customers can feel comfortable knowing that when they see the big golden arches, they know what they're going to get because they know who's providing it. They're not going to be confused. And so that's trademarks. So we've talked about patents, copyrights, and trademarks. There's other kinds of less used intellectual property, but also quite interesting. And one of them is industrial designs, or what they call them in the United States is design patents. So I've talked about patents, but design patents, when I talk about patents just generally, I'm talking about utility, things that work, things that, as I say, impact, drop on your toe, that kind of thing. Design patents are focused on how something looks, like a product looks. So you remember way back, we used to be able to buy those Nokia phones and get the face plates. And you could have different kind of color face plates and stuff like that. Those were perfect for design patents because the faceplate was really about a look. It didn't really have any functionality to it, but whoever made faceplates wanted to protect their unique designs, and so you'd have a design patent to cover that. You know, Apple and Samsung, who make their phones, had a big dust-up over industrial design or design patents in the United States and elsewhere a few years ago. I think it's still ongoing to some degree.
Probably,
but that look of the phone with the rounded edges and the certain proportions and everything is incredibly powerful to consumers. And they are fighting for the right to stop each other from using it, or the right, well, Samsung, I think, wanted to. I can't remember who had the design patents, but anyway, either one wants to be the only one to offer that look of phone. Everybody else has to offer a different looking phone. And it turns out it matters a lot to customers how their phone looks, just sitting on the table. So that's industrial designs. We also talk about other things like, this is a bit out there and very rarely used, but things like integrated circuit topographies. And as you know, integrated circuit, or IC, is like is a computer chip. And the way those are laid out in their actual, like in software, they design these things with all the transistors interconnecting with other components and all these wires that are at the microscopic level. There's actually kind of a quasi-copyright right on those things. They call them topographies, but I won't talk so much about that.
Exactly. There's so much. This is really fascinating. And so, can you tell me a little bit? How often do you get maybe people that come into your office that talk? And I think that copyright is probably the one that I'm the closest one to because of content creation, and I hear a lot about it. And actually, I just had a lady on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she spoke about putting content out there and then someone stealing basically that content and putting it back into their form. And how often do you get people that come to you that are like, well, I'm creating all this content, I'm really working really hard on it, or maybe they're finding an idea and you're like, well, you can't trademark that, or you can't, this is not a copyright issue. How often does that happen in your business and in your day-to-day?
For my day-to-day, I don't see, I'll have clients that are what you would consider patent clients, and in their business something will come up because they know me as an intellectual property person,
right,
and feel comfortable talking to me about all sorts of aspects of their business, they'll say, we also have an issue where content from our website has been sort of basically scraped, and it's being put up in China or something like that. And, I don't mean to impugn the Chinese, but sometimes it happens more often with them. But they'll come to me and they'll say, what is this? And I will bring in a colleague for that kind of thing who will deal with the copyright. But so I don't see it I don't see it all that often.
Makes sense.
But roughly speaking, you're trying to identify that they do have the right, the copyright, and they do have the right to the work, and they own it, and it's theirs, so that they can enforce their copyright. One thing that's interesting to note that I didn't bring up is that with copyright, as compared to, say, patents, the minute you create a work and put it in kind of a fixed form, like a podcast, you record it, you put your poem down on paper, this copyright arises. So it automatically arises in law as a result of you actually having just made the thing, right? And so while there are ways to engage the government to register your copyright officially, and I recommend that you look into that, or anybody look into that, just having created the thing gives you a right, generally speaking. And so, and whereas with patents, if you invent something and go talk about it, you don't have any right to stop others. You have to engage the patent system legally to do it. So that's something people are going to want to know. But all the time in trademarks, my clients are regularly dealing in trademarks because they're businesses, and branding's important for businesses to stand out. You don't want to be ignored and all that stuff. And depending on where the business is in what we call the supply chain or the value chain, depending on where they are in that, trademarks become more or less important. So let's say you're a total customer-facing company, like you are, let's say. Your ability to stop others from using your name or the name of your podcast is incredibly important to you, because if someone just popped up and did that, there'd be dilution and no one would know who was you and what. Whereas let's say you were creating a piece of software that actually helps podcasts get made. Customers, like regular people walking down the street who are listening to podcasts, don't really know your name or care about your name. Your reputation in the field of being a good software maker that solves some problems is important. And to that extent, your ability to stop others from copying your name is powerful, but maybe not as useful as you can imagine. There's millions of people out on the streets, and if they are confused, then that's a problem for Julian. That's maybe not, no one really cares anyway on the streets about the software provider guy. But there are a few people that care. There are a few companies that will be like, I need to get this piece of software because it's extremely valuable from one person. And so, and if you were going to grow that business around your reputation with that great piece of software, you might consider branding. And then other individuals, for example, the kitchen inventors who aren't even planning to create a business out of it. They created invention, created initial pitch, an initial sort of proposed market, but they really want to sell that to someone else. They may not even care about branding because it's the someone else's branding that's going to be customer facing anyway. So, that's what I was going to say earlier, that you had asked and I didn't address it. How does a person...
at what point does a person...
what do we come to? And how do they think about getting started, and, where do they go? And one thing that I've discovered in watching individuals do this themselves, they come to me as clients and I learn from them, they learn from me, sure, but I also learn from them, is that what they do, they're trying to prove out a small market at first. I think the best thing, because everybody wants to be like a millionaire, multimillionaire, but you have to go along the path to get there. You can't just be a millionaire tomorrow. And so you can't spend $500,000 on a marketing campaign when you can't supply the market, or maybe that you don't actually have a market, right? So you tend to prove it locally and small. So if you've created a thing, that cool kitchen knife or whatever, figure out how to make a few of them, which is its own project, but also like sell them to people in in, I don't know, sell them to chefs. Go to chefs and say, listen, I think this is really useful. Would you give it a try? Get their feedback. And then, you start to get a sense and you haven't spent that much at that point, but you start to get a sense, is this attractive to this chef? Could this be attractive to home chefs? Could this be attractive to a different kind of person? But you keep it local and small. And there are ways to do that you're not necessarily disclosing your invention before filing for patent, if it's an invention thing. But many people are saying, well, I've created this thing. I'm certain I'm going to sell millions of them. Therefore, I'm going to spend a fortune marketing that. And it's like, well, step back a bit. Figure out if you've got a system of a product and a system of selling it that actually works at small scale.
Yeah.
You will then be able to attract dollars to scale it up. But if you don't have a system that works at small scale, it probably will really fail at large scale.
Right.
So
makes sense. Because how much are we talking about, like, to file a patent? Like, I know it probably depends. It probably is not a black and white answer, but it's probably a significant investment.
It's not cheap, and the reason is it's just it's a specialized kind of job.
Yeah.
But also it just takes a lot of time for a person like me to write a patent, let's say, for you. And I try. So just in a nutshell, I mean, let's say to get a patent in Canada and the U.S. and you can, and by the way, patents are jurisdictional. Like, you can't get a world patent.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
There are ways to move towards getting patents all over the world that seem like a world patent, but there is no world patent. So let's just say, for your purposes, for Canada and the U.S. to get a patent on a widget, you're probably spending $25,000.
Okay. Wow.
So it's not something you sniff at.
You just jump in blindly. Yeah. And I guess that segues really well to my next question, which is more about when we were talking about the mind of an investor, right? And when you're looking at helping people, and I know you have an entrepreneurial mindset as well, what is the process for people that are thinking about having a passion project? Right now, everyone that I'm hearing about, they're talking about creating an app. They have the next great idea for an app. So it's in your head. You have this great idea of an app. What's next? What do you do next in order to turn that into a legitimate business that maybe one day turns into Facebook or the big apps that we see out there? Yeah.
I mean, with something like, just to compare that to, say, a podcast. A podcast is very personality driven. Almost no one can copy who you are.
Yeah, true.
And that's a really cool thing, because inherently you have exclusivity, which is inherently what's going to get you to scale your listeners.
Yeah.
Because no one else can get you anywhere else. Something like that, right? But when it comes to, let's say, an invention, a machine on the table, it doesn't have a personality. It's not unique in that multivariate way. It's something that once you see it, you can someone else can copy it and stuff like that. So, what you want to, I think, what you want to try to do is recognize that the thing you're creating gets anonymous pretty quickly, and therefore, right? Who invented? If you remember the old TiVo boxes, those recording boxes on Sex and the City had a whole segment on them, and it was it was almost a personality in their story.
Right.
If you can remember who the inventor of that was, none of us can, right? Only if you're in patents do you kind of understand that, because they have tons of patents.
Makes sense.
Cool, really great, interesting guy. But to go back, when someone is first conceiving of something, they are trying to figure out how to scale it, because without burning all their money in scaling it. If you make 100 products, and then the marginal cost of making the 101st is like cents on the dollar compared to the 100 products, that's kind of where you want to be. Because then you can make another 500 for almost nothing, and still sell them for almost the price of all the other ones you had.
Yeah.
So you want to think about your local market. You want to think about what your exclusivity is going to be, and by the way, intellectual property isn't the only way you can do that. We can talk a bit about the other ways of having exclusivity, which are really super interesting, actually. But find out what your exclusivity is, because if you want to scale that, you will need someone's help. and like their money or their sort of connections or whatever. You want to be able to open doors if you figured out how to have exclusivity and how you would scale if you did have the resources. So you're thinking ahead. Then you can often attract those great partners who are looking for that answer.
Yeah.
They are looking. They have money. They have cash. They're like, I have too much cash, and it's like inflation sucks, and so I need to invest in something.
Yeah.
And so they're looking for people who are like, well, I've got a fairly modest idea right now, but it's actually pretty interesting, and here's how I would push it through if I had the resources, and here's how we keep others from jumping in and copying it.
Yeah.
And then the investors say, that's actually one style of business I'm really interested in. So there's your money. And so the other thing you're doing is you're signaling sophistication, because one thing I see a lot of inventors, and it doesn't take them long to get sophisticated, but they'll come initially and they think, if I just put an idea out, forget intellectual property, forget anything, the world will beat a path to my door. Everybody's going to want it once they see it.
Right.
And I think that there are very few products and services that have that effect, that everybody's going to want it. If you think of how hard Apple had to work to market and sell the iPhone, now everybody wants it, but it's not like it just happened when they saw it.
Because we only see it when it actually becomes the big thing, but we don't see the years it actually took and the work that it took in the background to make people just be aware of what Apple even is and what the vision for that really is.
That's right.
So what are some other ways to get that exclusivity you were talking about, so outside of just intellectual property? Yeah.
So one of the things that's interesting, and you can learn, I've learned a great deal from people like Michael Porter, who is a Harvard prof who deals with the concept of competition and does studies on competition and does case studies of companies. And he has kind of a really interesting model of the forces of competition and how they interact.
Yeah.
And you'll have, I think he calls it the 5 forces is his model. And because, okay, I put out a product, and who's my competitor? Well, let's take a broader view of what competition is and say, who's going to drain the resources I need to get sales and to survive?
Yeah.
Who's going to drain the resources? And actually, the government could drain your resources because they could raise taxes on the particular kind of product that you're selling. If you sell, let's say if you sell cannabis, cigarettes, or something like that, the government's taking, I don't know what percent, but let's say they take 50%. Well, they're taking your profits. That's one way to look at it anyway.
Yeah.
And for good reason, like all the things the government, justifies it, that sort of thing. But you also have your actual competitors, the other companies that actually make cigarettes. And then you have these other kinds of ways of viewing sort of the draining of resources from your company.
Yeah.
So one of the studies they did was absolutely fascinating, and I think it was Joan Magretta in a book I read at the library. She wrote a book on Michael Porter's ideas. I think she was a collaborator of his, and she explained it really well, I think, in her book on IKEA, and how Michael Porter's view is that the companies that are serious business and sustainable, and I don't mean sustainable in the environmental way, I mean sustainable in that they're naturally set up to keep competitors away, is they use a number of intersecting activities. So I'll use the IKEA example, which fascinates me, and I'm sure someone else could talk about this even better than I could, of course. But so you go to IKEA, and as compared to, say, Sears, you're going to IKEA because, number one, you kind of want to get your product today or soon.
Right.
So let's say you're looking for a couch of some sort.
Yep.
Well, you're almost certain, if you go to IKEA, drive up, you're almost certain to go home. They'll have the couch.
Yeah.
Now, they'll have the couch because it's in a flat pack. You'll have to build it when you get home, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it won't be quite the same. It depends on the couch, depends on what it is. Maybe couch is not a good idea or a good example, because I don't even know if you assemble IKEA couches, but whatever you do, okay.
Took me some time, so.
Yeah, and we have IKEA stuff at home. But so now you're thinking, okay, well, as compared to Sears, Sears has beautiful furniture, or they did, let's say, had beautiful furniture, high-end stuff, but you couldn't necessarily get it that day or that week or even that month. And it would have to be delivered. You couldn't put it in your car if you had a regular car. If you had a van or something, like maybe you could stick it in a bungee cord down the tailgate and all that sort of stuff. Maybe you could do that, or
Yeah.
but it would have to be delivered. So it's a process. Well, IKEA said, well, if we offload the building of the thing to the customer, they are willing to trade that for the ability to get it immediately. And it's actually not that hard to build, and it's actually pretty good furniture, you know, for most of the stuff's really good.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that allows them to have flat packs, which then can stack in the warehouse so that they always have them. That also allows them to save on transportation costs because you can get way more flat packs into a truck.
Yep.
So all these intersecting ideas, the customer gets what they want right away. Yeah, the customer has to put up with building them themselves, but they're willing to. They can fit it into their car. They don't have to arrange for their own transportation. They can usually fit it into their car. IKEA can save money on warehouse space and transportation costs.
Space, yeah.
All this stuff intersects as a bunch of different activities on the part of the company. So you can, as an individual, can figure out what activities you can layer that differentiate you from your competition. And if you only have one activity that differs you from your competition, that one's easy to copy. But if you have, say, 3, 4, 5, they can't copy any one and be successful.
Right.
So let's say Sears says, oh, we're going to copy the flat pack. Okay. Where are you going to store all the flat packs? Because Sears is a smaller outfit, and they have a display floor. So they don't really have a back warehouse where they can stack flat packs. They don't have a place you can drive up to put your, like these, everything changes. Their retail locations would have to change. Everything changes. And
so it's a massive investment on their part that
that's right.
maybe they're not willing to do at that time.
That's right. So it creates this natural self-reinforcing competitive position. And this may I'm not saying that any individual, as I say, at their kitchen is going to necessarily come up with all these other things right away, but put yourself on the path to trying to figure them out, because you are going to enter the space of big commerce where lots of sophisticated players are out there. And if you can figure out that set of activities that you would do to either make it or offer it, maybe you have a direct sales model as opposed to through distributors and retail stores. There's a great Direct Sellers Association of Canada, who I've spoken for on intellectual property issues, and that's sort of their model. So maybe you sell through that model because it's a more personalized setup. Another example of sort of a natural exclusivity is, or a non-intellectual property exclusivity, is if you actually have hold of something that no one else can get a hold of. So you actually have an exclusive right to supply a certain raw material. Right. Or if you actually have a machine that costs a lot to buy. And that's your barrier to entry right now, is competitors aren't just going to jump in and buy a $250,000 machine, but you've got it. So you've kind of, because the machine produces something of value for people, you can then say, well, there's a sort of a natural exclusivity. It's not an ultimate exclusivity like, say, an intellectual piece of intellectual property would be, but it's these kinds of things that are what we call barriers to entries or moats that make it harder for other competitors to
100%. I can think about like McDonald's right now. If you go to McDonald's, they'll all have kind of like that self-checkout kiosk, right? Which sets them apart a little bit because the lines are a little shorter, there's less employees, and if you wanted to go to replicate that, it's not as easy as just saying like, well, I'll just buy the same machine. Like your whole process kind of changes.
I agree.
So you can't, like, that creates a little bit of that exclusivity. No, but that's really good. That's so, once again, interesting. I think I repeated myself a couple times now, but to shift gears a little bit, because one thing when we connected, we also spoke about the idea of creating a business, and I'm really interested into that part. Is how do people take, or when is it a good idea for people to say, well, I have this idea that I've been working on and I'm really passionate about it, and I think that it's going to change the world, but now let's actually change it into a business. Let's actually create not only a passion project, not something that I'm reaching out to friends and family to see if it's a good idea. Let's turn it into a business, and let's talk maybe about incorporating. I know that that's maybe a little away from what you do on a day-to-day, but I know that you're familiar with it. But what are the advantages of actually incorporating and making a business out of your work?
In my view, the key the key function of incorporating is to make it easier to scale the business. So if you're an individual and you own a business, an investor may want to invest in your business.
Yep.
Now, they can't have shares in you. Right, and so that's what the investor wants is they're like, well, I'm going to give you $100,000 to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to get 15% of your shares.
Yep.
Well, they don't get 15% of you, so it becomes something where they have to issue a debt or a loan, or it becomes something else. I think the investor would rather and feel more comfortable having shares in the corporation, and maybe some of them are voting, or maybe they have a director seat. Now, why? So incorporating is one way to make you attractive to people that can, or to people that can help you scale. It also is a place, sort of a notional place, you can put all the assets of the company.
Makes sense.
So if you have a patent for yourself, you can assign it to the company. Now the company owns the patent, and you in turn own some of the shares of the company, or all of them,
or
if
most
it's just
of them.
you. But it signals some level of sophistication that you're ready to do business with a bigger entity. And I think that small companies should always be willing to contract in some way with a bigger entity on a commercial terms. Let's say the bigger entity sees you're supplying products even at a small scale, and they also see you have a patent. They say, hey, can we license your patent?
Yeah.
You say, yeah, well, the company owns the patent, and the company will license it to you for these terms. And the income goes into the company, and it can be dealt with in very tax-favorable terms, not as individual income, but as income to the company. And, I mean, I'm definitely not a corporate lawyer, and I'm actually not a lawyer. I'm a patent agent.
Right.
But there are tax advantages that you can take advantage of if you leave some money in the company and use it for growth, or use it for employment, or whatever it is you're doing. So an incorporation is a way of is kind of a place to put all your stuff that's going to make the enterprise work. It's kind of like that.
Makes sense, yeah.
And it also allows you, when you bring on people that are going to negotiate on behalf of the company, they're not negotiating on behalf of you, they're negotiating on behalf of the company. So the company itself is contracting with another company, or the company itself is offering products to consumers. The company itself also allows you to a degree, limit some liability.
Yep. Which is the bigger one.
Yeah, if a customer uses the product as directed and hurts themselves, they may wish to come back on you. And if you're an individual, all of your personal assets can be at risk.
Yep.
Your house, your car, they're like, oh, you need to pay me, so you need to sell your, 1978 Volkswagen.
Right.
Like, oh, I really loved that car. But in the corporation, and it has to be done right, like, there is a way to reach through the corporation, because if it's just being used as a protective shell, really, but all the money's being drained out of it, and it's really, when you step back and look at it, it's actually an individual running the thing and trying to protect him or herself from liability, then the person suing the company can kind of, under our current laws, reach right through and get your individual. So you have to be, you should retain counsel to tell them what you're looking to do.
Yeah.
Tell them, ask them, listen, I mean, I'm not looking to hurt anybody or sell them products that don't work or that hurt them, but at the same time, if they happen to, or I've missed something, I don't want to lose my house over this.
Right.
How do I set this up? And it doesn't have to be terribly complex. And I mean, many people who are listening will know that you could probably go online and like register a corporation this afternoon, but it would not have all that protective effect. It would just be kind of a line item in the government database for now.
Yeah.
You would want to speak to, I recommend you speak to a lawyer about getting a shareholder agreement in place, getting all the minute books and all the things. Now, different lawyers and different outfits have packages for that, for startups especially. They say, well, we'll help you set this up and set it up in a way that works for you, and it won't break the bank. A lot of people say, well, once I talk to a lawyer, I'm just like burning money. Like they're so expensive, and they tend to be. But if you look around and talk to lawyers who are competent, and especially some of the big firms in let's say Toronto, often have an entrepreneurs program where I don't know, it's not cheap, but it's say for $5,000.
Yeah.
They'll set you up with initial provisional patent filing, which is kind of an informal patent filing if that's the nature of your creation.
Yeah.
And they'll help you incorporate and set up a minute book or something like that, or set up a shareholders agreement or what have you. So very basics, just to get you started. And they sometimes offer that to clients coming off the street, or they'll offer it through the local, what we call incubators, or places like the Creative Destruction Lab and other places where entrepreneurs can come to get educated and to learn about resources for literally structuring a corporation, literally understanding intellectual property, and figuring out how it all fits into what they're kind of doing. There's a lot of help out there that's not very expensive.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And what is because you touched on that a little bit, but I'm curious to know, what is the difference between registering your business and actually incorporating? Like, is there even a difference? Because I think that for the listeners, maybe like if we were to uncomplicate it a little bit and really put it in explainable terms, because I know I deal a lot with real estate, and people will tell you at some point, oh, you needed to incorporate or in order to protect yourself from this, and that, which is great. But I think that for a lot of people that are looking to just jump into it, maybe buy their first investment property, put a tenant in, live in the other unit or something like that, it gets really confusing. So they're like, well, okay, now I registered the business, because even for myself, right, I registered my podcast, like you said, you can do that on the internet in a couple minutes, and it's going to be done. There's a small fee to pay, and then you're good to go. But actually going through the process of incorporating, like, what happens between those two? Like, what are the advantages that you get when you register your business, and what are some of the gaps maybe that incorporating brings into the picture, Dan?
I may not be able to answer that very well. It's something a number of lawyers at my firm could just walk you through really quickly. I really do focus on patents and intellectual property, but I'll tell you in a nutshell. There are different kinds of business. You could have, let's say, a sole proprietorship, which is just Matt Powell selling apples on the side of the road and taking money and paying taxes on it. And then there's sort of a partnership where it's a couple of people are together, but it's a structure. It's a business, and it's got a registration. And a corporation is a particular kind of business. And it allows the issuance of shares in the business. It allows some limitation of liability of the people who are directing the business or the directors, and it allows it to hold money as opposed to individuals holding the money in their bank accounts. The business can have a bank account, so it allows you to. A corporation is an abstraction that allows separation from individual. And the whole thing is that a corporation can survive beyond the life of any one person who started it, who created it, who was running it for a while and then took off and retired to Hawaii or something. The corporation still persists. So I think, roughly speaking, the main benefits of a corporation are that it is a very convenient way, as I say, to hold your stuff that's going to make the business work, to limit liability, but allow interchangeability of people running it as well, which isn't for every kind of business. It's not. It's not. And then for corporations, there can be private corporations, which I think that there's just a huge number of private corporations. And what that means is that they're not basically listed on a stock exchange. The public can't invest in them using sort of a standard financial planner or a broker. And then there's public corporate. You know all about this. I'm sure you've talked about it 45 times. But so that's roughly speaking. But I deal with this, but once we get past this stage of the basics, there's things I don't know, and that it's best,
totally.
And obviously are not qualified to advise on.
100%.
But if a client were to come to me and ask me this, I'd literally just loop in one of my colleagues here at the firm and say, okay, can you walk him or her through what fits for your situation and what the differences in costs of setup are and what they get out of it ultimately. Like, why would they do this and why wouldn't they? So it's a pretty quick conversation when you have it with one of my colleagues.
For sure. No, that makes sense. No, this is amazing. And this was such an insightful conversation. Even for myself, I was really excited when we spoke beforehand. What kind of people should be reaching out? If people are at this stage, they should be maybe at least coming to you and having a conversation? Like, who would you say, you know, what is the typical profile of the people that comes to you?
Yeah. So I deal with individuals who I deal with big companies, medium companies, and individuals. If you're talking about a sort of a medium-sized company, it'll be the CEO that's come to me and they say, some of our people have come up with this thing. We're very adjacent to a competitor. We've been fighting with them for years for customers. Pretty sure they would knock this off pretty quickly. What do we do about it? And these are sophisticated people. Obviously, they've dealt with business. They know way more about business than I do, but they need some help in the slice that is intellectual property. And we talk about that stuff, and I ask them questions about who's the competitor, and what's the dynamic there, and what's the invention. Of course, we get into that. Big corporations is a little more. And I'll get into the individuals in just a sec, but big corporations are a little more, they'll have in-house counsel, maybe in-house patent counsel, that kind of stuff, and they'll be flipping me jobs that have already been, they're like, here's the invention, here's the inventor's description, it's all worked out, we've filled out a form, can you just write the patent? We'll take care of filing and all that sort of stuff. So that's another way I work. But when it comes to individuals, when should they come to me with an individual idea? When they think of an idea, and then the next day they wake up thinking of the idea, and they're like, I can't, this thing's got a hold of me. There's something there, then, maybe give it a week, but give me a call after that. And noodle it. Type some ideas out on your computer, draw some diagrams 100%. Down for yourself. Work through it yourself to figure out, if this were a go, how might it work? How might it work? What am I missing? What am I missing? And then come to me and we'll have a jam on the idea. It may not be a patentable idea, but how are you going to know unless you come to me and we sort of talk through it, right?
For sure.
So I don't mind a raw idea coming to me. It's nice that there's some paperwork that you've written out and drawn, but I have found that a quick phone call, you can kind of get it pretty quick. As I say, there's a bit of that barrier of let's just make sure there's not going to be a conflict with my firm and my current clients. But other than that, once we get the conversation going, I tend to, by the way, have a half hour. If it's a great conversation, I'll have an hour conversation or an hour and a half. Like if it's just enjoyable, I'll have a call. We'll talk and it'll be good. And they'll learn something. I'll learn something. And I've hopefully can put some notional structure on what they're doing and what they might want to think about doing next. And the answer to that may be you probably shouldn't patent this.
Right.
What you might want to do is X. What you might want to do is Y. Or would you like to speak to my colleague because I think this is more of the copyright thing, or this is more of a right. So let's have that call, and then usually those individuals, the cold callers or the individuals would be referred to me. They leave the call feeling much better about their concept and much clearer about what they think they'd like to do with it. Like, oh, I think I know my next step is X. Or, oh, I think all I need right now is a non-disclosure agreement, which is reasonably simple, although it's not a panacea but it's a very simple way, a contract as between you and the person you're going to disclose your invention to, so that, or whatever your business concept is, so as to bind them from kind of running away with it, or disclosing it.
100%,
So they go away with, oh, maybe I just need a non-disclosure, and I'll say, well, there's a few things you may need, but you have to choose, and it's based on how much you want to spend either with me or how much effort you want to put into this. So
no, that's really good. And where can the people find you if they want to reach out to you? What's the best way to reach out to you?
All right. Well, I'm here at Dickinson Wright in Toronto. I'm in a big office tower, but I often also work from home. You can email me at mpowell@dickinsonwright.com. You can go to our website and check out all of our people. We have a Toronto office, but we're also I think we have 19 offices total, and they're dotted throughout the United States in great cities throughout the United States. So we have a huge U.S. presence across all areas, not just intellectual property, but real estate and all sorts of entrepreneurial activities. And we're the one Canadian office, but we're very well integrated with them. And anyway, try me that way and check out our website.
No, definitely. We'll put that information in the description and the show notes. But really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Honestly, like this was so insightful. I hope people at home took something away from this conversation. That's always the goal. But if you did, make sure that you shared with someone. That is really the only way that this platform grows. But outside of that, yeah, we'll share all the information. Make sure you are subscribed. Make sure that you like and leave us some positive reviews, comments, anything that you would like to hear more about. But we really appreciate Matt coming on. For you guys at home, make sure that you are taking the steps today to ensure that you're 1% closer to your goals than you were yesterday. Thanks for coming on once again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right.